I was sharing earlier today with Steve and Chris. I saw one of the most troubling polls I've ever seen in my life. The career goals of 1 in 10 American teens. The career goal is to be a social media celebrity. Career goal. Not like, oh, it happened because I was awesome at playing guitar. No, career goal is to be a social media celebrity. Now, you might think 1 in 10, that's not too bad. It's 10% of our teenage population has a career goal of having followers in the digital world. That's how sad we've gotten when it comes to actually making a difference in the lives of people. So we've reached that point. Very interesting article, very interesting study, and I believe it was out of England. So we're going to continue in talking about Paul's letter to the Romans. We've been talking a lot the last couple weeks about guilt, and really how guilt plays a role in our Christian life. Answering some of these questions, is guilt unavoidable? As a Christian, is guilt unavoidable? Should guilt ever be welcome in the church? And should we ever make anyone feel guilty for their missteps? These are big questions to ask when it comes to guilt in the church, because for a long time, guilt was kind of the church's process. Guilt was a big part, guilt and fear were a big part of our evangelistic, the dissemination of Christianity really came about through guilt and through fear. But biblically, as we've been kind of going through Romans, Paul's really trying to get us away from any of those issues. And then last week we took a look at 3 distinct definitions of guilt, and none of them really have a lot in common. Because guilt in and of itself is a very hard thing to define. And I use the old baseball adage, I don't know what it is, but I can tell you when I see it. I can't define it. If you're looking for what it is that makes a kid a great baseball player, what tells you that that's the kid, I don't know, but I can tell you when I see it. The idea that guilt really kind of runs the spectrum of influence in our lives. Guilt drives us in some cases to do things. Guilt causes us to respond in certain ways. Guilt brings us to a lot of these things. So I'm going to kind of lay the groundwork for today, talking about how many of you have ever been somewhere where you didn't really feel like you belonged. Okay? I mean genuinely, not like, you're a fat guy around a bunch of people who look awesome. But I mean, put your hand down, Steve. Anybody ever been somewhere where you really feel like, oh gosh, I'm not sure what I'm doing here? I went and saw Run DMC in 1990. I got to be honest, didn't really belong at the Run DMC concert, but I enjoyed myself anyway. You go places a lot of times where you do and don't belong. I was talking with Marcus and his friend the other day about how life is sort of this series of you rise to the top only to voluntarily go right back to the bottom. Right? When you hit 6th grade, you're the cream of the crop at the elementary school. Right? They're terrified of you. The 3rd graders revere you. Right? The kindergartners can only hope to beat you. And then the next day you go to 7th grade. Right? And 7th grade, you're garbage. You smell bad, you're worthless, who cares? Right? The 8th graders are like, you pathetic, sad little person. Right? They don't care about you, they want you gone because you're disrupting their social hierarchy. And then all of a sudden, what happens when you get to be in 8th grade? You're like, yeah, that's right. World, look out, I'm in charge. Right? You've got like 16 different minions that do your bidding. You're running the place, you got a little racket going on over here with lunch money loans. You're in charge. But then what happens to Mr. Big Pants when he goes into 9th grade? Right? All of a sudden the seniors are like, don't even. Right? And I was telling them, I said the funny thing that I remember about high school when I first went in, because I went to a rather large high school, was when I first went into high school, it really wasn't the seniors that bought it. It was the sophomores. Because they were so happy to no longer be at the bottom. Right? And so the sophomores are the ones who, pound on you and intimidate you, and right, because they're like a whole half inch taller than you are as a freshman. But it's like all of a sudden you're like, I just want to belong, I just want to fit in, and you go through all this and you end up at this sort of peak again. Senior in high school. The world is your oyster. Right? Everybody remember senior year in high school? I do.
Yeah.
I do, man. I remember it. Oh gosh, it was the greatest. Like it was the greatest. 9 months, 10 months, whatever you actually go to school, of my life, because I'm like, I'm going to go conquer the world now. And as soon as you get out, right? You go to that commencement, and your valedictorian gets up and goes, I don't know how we were able to, but we did it. Right? Everybody remember that? Because every valedictorian says the same thing. Right? We weathered this storm of life. And every parent sitting there just going, congratulations on the easiest 4 years of your life. And so you graduate from high school, and all of a sudden, what happens now? Now you're either at the bottom of the workforce, or you're at the bottom of the college, hierarchy. And all of a sudden, you get back up. You get to be a senior in college. Same process. You leave college, you go from being the coolest guy on campus, right? You're captain of the drama club, because that makes you awesome. You're king of the chessboard. You were the only guy in your dorm with a TV, right? So everybody came to you. You had a microwave that you hid from the RA because you were the RA. And so people wanted to be your friend, and everybody needs you around. And all of a sudden, you got in the real world, and you're like, you don't understand who I am, right? I matter. And everyone's like, yeah, that's cool. Can you clean the can liners out and wash out the trash cans? And by the way, the biohazard of the children's ministry needs to be cleaned, right? And all of a sudden you're like, wait, no, I was awesome like 5 minutes ago. And then it seems like every time, you're kind of going like this. And life's sort of about this like process of belonging after you don't belong. You sort of come into it, and then you're like, I want so hard to matter. I want so hard to belong. And all of a sudden one day you start to belong, and you don't remember life before you belong there. And you think, man alive, I don't remember even breaking into this now, but I know that I'm a part of it. And all of a sudden, you can't imagine life without you, in that. You can't imagine that life without that in your life. Anybody ever been the person that had a hard time with people wanting to join something you were in? I'll be honest with you. I'm going to give you really, this is heartfelt and this is big, and I'm going to be really honest with you, but I'm a Braves fan. And I couldn't stand people who became Braves fans in the 90s. It bothered me. How long have you been a Braves fan? Oh, since 93. No. You're not welcome here. You don't know the truth. You haven't been through the hard times. Right? And I don't want to welcome those people in. And it kind of bothers me. But now if I have like a 12-year-old who walks up and says I'm a Braves fan, I'm like, oh no, you're cool, you're in, because we've been really bad for a significant number of years now. But I hate people who are bandwagon fans. And I don't want them. Even if I'm not a fan of that team, if I know you're a bandwagon of that team, we're done being friends. Yeah, at least as long as we're talking about whatever that sport is. And I've been good at keeping people out of certain things, certain realities. And so today we're kind of talking about this transition that we go from not belonging for specific reasons, that of the law, to belonging. And how that belonging is now a part of our identity. That belonging in the family of God is a part of who we are for good. And the entrance is taken care of. And so it says, therefore, brethren, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live, according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. And so we've been kind of looking at this sort of progression through Romans. We started as sinners who are basically set and basically going to be cast off because of the law. And we transitioned from sinners to forgiven and saved, which is a really good transition, right? We begin to feel that. And then we read, a couple weeks ago, that we're not amongst the condemned. It was really the first time we read that. We are no longer dealing with a guilty verdict in our life, which is also great, right? How many of us are glad we're not condemned? How many of us live in a place that isn't condemned? Right? That's also good. But the idea that we're no longer condemned, but now all of a sudden Paul says that we are debtors. You're going to need to click back on that slide, please. Paul says that we are debtors now. And because we are debtors, we now have this sort of new role. Now, most of us, when you hear the term debt, go, ugh, right? None of us go, yes, I have a great interest rate on my credit cards. You know, most of us here are debt, and we feel a certain weight, a certain guilt, a certain burden. But indebtedness is not necessarily a bad thing. In no way is, we can be indebted to a friend. I mean, how many of us have a good friend that we're indebted to? Who's been there through the hard times, who's cared for us, in times when really they shouldn't, who's been there when really they should have walked out on us, who's been there when, times were at their most difficult. And we're indebted. We feel a certain loyalty because of that indebtedness. And so Paul says that, listen, we are indebted to Christ. We are indebted to what God has done for us. And really, debtors is one that owes something to another. We owe to God what He has done for us. Is that He has brought us forgiveness, He has brought us salvation, He has no longer let us live our lives condemned, and we owe God a debt. We owe God not just a debt of gratitude, like, man, I can't tell you how thankful I am, but we actually owe back to Him, what He has done for us. Is that this is a part of that sort of, we're coming into that freshman year now. And there is an indebtedness where Christ has done for us, has done all the legwork for us, and now we belong, but we are debtors in our initial state. And then he says, for as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are the sons of God. So now we have indebted to sons. Now, this is the highest place of honor you can get at this point. So we go from indebted, strangers, sinners, and really condemned, to now sons. And as C.S. Lewis says, the Son of God became a man so that He could enable men to become the sons of God. So now we are sons. And we have this combination of debtors and sons, right? A son can often carry some guilt with it, right? As dads, in the room, we're good at the bringing the, with our kids, right? It's kind of our spiritual gift. That we can just kind of look at. And so being a son sometimes can carry some guilt. And one of the things that's always important, I think, to talk about is, especially one of the reasons that I don't spend a lot of time on Father's Day and Mother's Day and Valentine's Day and stuff like that in church, is because for a lot of people, those are bad experiences. A lot of people, when you go, hey, aren't moms great? And you got somebody in the back row going, no, my mom was awful. And thanks for completely causing me to tune out for the rest of the service. So a lot of times for people in this situation, maybe you hear the term sons and you hear the term debtors and things like that, and you think, I don't know, I don't exactly have the best relationship with my father. I don't exactly have the best relationship. But it's important to remember that Paul's illustrations are always meant to be in the perfect sense. They're always meant to be in the perfect sense. So when it says that we are sons, it means that we stand, linked. We stand, connected with our Father in the most perfect fatherly sense. So whatever that perfection is the perfection that we have. And so we stand there basically in this perfect environment where now we stand as sons. And I think it's important that when we look at this kind of concept, I think for a lot of us, we sort of start as faces in the crowd. And I think for a lot of us, sometimes we feel lost. Maybe in life we don't feel like we belong. Maybe in life we don't feel like we have a connection. And there are a lot of people in life that don't. And guilt can cause us sometimes to sort of bleed back into the crowd a little bit, especially in church. Is that we would rather just sort of distance ourselves and just fade. Anonymity is really something that a lot of people strive for, not just on the internet, but on Twitter. But a lot of people strive for it in life, and a lot of people strive for it in their faith. But God's saying, no, I want to pull you out of that crowd and make you a son. Well, there's no place to hide at that point. You can't just bleed in anonymously into the crowd and disappear when you are elevated to the position of family. And so God's saying, listen, my goal is to call you out of anonymity and call you out of this world where, guilt controls you and, a desire to try to, work out your salvation through your works. And He's saying, listen, I want to elevate you and I want to bring you to this place of importance. So we're seeing this progression continue to happen now, where we start as sinners and now we're sons. And Paul continues to build on it. So then he says, for you did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear. So, nothing about the salvation message is meant to bring you to a place of fear again. Nothing about what God has done for us is meant to bring us to a place where we suddenly feel like we have to hit ourselves with sticks, and we have to make sure that our penance is clear by, how much we hate ourselves, by how much we despise who we are. But the reality is that God's saying, listen, I have raised you to this place of sonship. I have brought you to this importance of being a son. I have raised you this. And the last thing we want to see with our kids is them beating themselves up and hating on themselves. Right? We want to see them confident and energetic and driven and focused and passionate about what they do. We don't live to see them wallowing in self-pity. When we see our kids wallowing in self-pity, what's the first thing we say? Stop acting like a child. Stop acting like a baby. Stop pitying yourself. Get over it. Move on. Our goal is to raise you up and get you away. We don't just go, no, it's cool. You can pity yourself all day. I got to be honest. Pitying yourself is very important to success. Right? How many of us would list that as one of the top personality traits of successful people? Self-pity. Right? No, we wouldn't. We would never say self-pity is critical to being a success in life. And so, in this case, we're trying to move away from guilt, which is typically very much a self-pity, situation where we're like, oh, I've just screwed up so bad, and it's just so terrible. And God, the Father, is going, yeah, that's great, but as my son or as my daughter, I'd like to see you kind of elevate past that just a hair, right? And so we move from guilt to adoption. So not only do we not have to carry the guilt of failure around anymore, which is nice. How many of us like to not carry the guilt of failure, right? Because we've all failed. Everybody in this room has failed on multiple occasions, but we don't have to carry it. But now we're adopted into, perfect sense, adopted into the family of God. His forgiveness is not just a commissioning, but an empowerment. So we're adopted into, he's not just forgiving us to go, no, it's great, come on into heaven. But it's an empowerment now to live without dragging the luggage. It's an empowerment now to live without dragging the stuff around. But how many of us voluntarily walk back and grab our guilt luggage and drag it? Because we feel like if we don't, then we're not sufficiently repenting. But he's saying, I want to empower you to do great things, but part of that is dropping the luggage. Because you can't do anything if your hands are full of luggage. You can't do anything if you're carrying the weight. You can't move fast. You can't be on the go. You can't live your life. You can't do the things I've asked you to do if you're too busy lugging this weight around. But we sit there and we kind of go back at God and say, yeah, but if I don't lug the weight around, then I'm not really repentant. If I don't lug the weight around, then I'm not really sorry. How many of us, when you have one of those situations, I talked about this a little bit last week with apologies from athletes and stuff like that. But you ever have a situation to where someone says they're sorry and they get over it too fast? And you're like, hey now, I would like a little bit more luggage dragging. Right? Come on now, you can be honest. You don't have to raise your hand, but you can be honest emotionally. Right? How many of us have went, you got over that way too fast? I gotta be honest, I said I forgive you, but I would like a little bit more, penance, right? I would like you to beat yourself over the head with a stick a little longer, right? Because I kind of feel like I freed you too soon. I'm going to be honest. I feel like you didn't learn anything. That's hard, isn't it? Because that's really, think about your relationship with God. That's what he's doing. But in reverse, we're going, don't let me off that easy. I really should hurt myself in order to make sure that you get this. I really should bind myself to make sure that you believe that I'm sorry. And I think we go through this balance in that sort of forgiveness cycle, which is why we constantly go back and pick up our guilt, because we go back and forth. And in reality, I always say the hardest thing to do in life is to forgive yourself. Unless you're a narcissist. And the hardest thing to do is forgive yourself. Because how many of us are still carrying weight around from our 20s? You know, our teenage years, maybe there's a little pain in there, you know? I mean, I've blocked out most of my teen years at this point because it just sort of become this shadowy haze so far ago. But the reality is I still remember my 20s, and I still remember the stuff I regret from my 20s. You know, I remember my 30s and things I regret from my 30s. You know, it's amazing how quickly it is you go back to that stuff sometimes when you make a mistake and you gosh, why do I always do this, right? No, just me? Okay. You know, but we have this sort of heaviness that kind of comes about from that. But God's saying, I want to empower you. And the only way to empower you is to get you to drop that weight, to get you to drop that guilt, to get you to drop that lack of self-forgiveness, to get you to drop this attitude that I've got to be consistently pounding myself over the head in order to be valuable. When the truth is, if you're so busy lugging guilt around, you have no value anyway. You're moving too slow, carrying too much, and the reality is you're the slow gazelle and you're going to get eaten by the leopard. I mean, that's just the way it is. We're moving on. And I think that's one of the things when you're trying to teach people how to move forward is one of the biggest things is dropping it. But the other thing that's interesting is this adoption in and of itself, you know, as we read here, it says that they cry out, by adoption we cry out, Abba Father, okay? So we end up in this situation to where we have this deep fatherly relationship. And this adoption is so real, so emotional that we call him Abba Father. This is not just some idea like we come into it and we're like, hey, I'm a son. No, it means that you are a son with a deep, deep connection with the Father to the point to where you can be honest. There's a real powerful relationship here. It doesn't mean that suddenly now we're stepping back at this deep distance from this mighty, powerful, reverend God. This boom, 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 right? And we're all intense and, you know, I approach God only with the proper prayers. Right? That is not a deep relationship with your child. You know, if my son only feels like he can approach me when he's at his best, we will never talk again. Right? Because that's unfair. If I tell my son, you know what, don't come to me unless you have a well-prepared agenda, and they submit it in writing first, of course, we're done, right? The relationship comes from the ability to communicate and interact regardless of how the situation is, regardless of what's happening beyond the situation. So when we look at this idea of Abba Father, there's an adoption and a bonding. There's a deep relationship between us and God. We have our relationship, our relationship with God becomes one of approachability and connection. We have this approachability with God. And I think sometimes for a lot of us, that's hard. That's hard to really embrace, is that God wants to hear what you have to say. God wants to hear where you're coming from emotionally. Of course, most importantly, He wants you to listen. He wants you to learn like any good father does. But at the same time, you can come and say whatever you want. But I think for a lot of us, we sometimes feel like we're not clean enough, we're not right enough, we're not dressed right enough, we're not in the right place. Our prayer is not systematically proper. Right? Because how does every prayer start? Dear whatever, right? There's a salutation. There is then praise. God, we're so thankful for how awesome you are, right? Then there is petition. Dear God, I got some issues. Then there is the obligatory, but in all honesty, your will. Then the closing, which is whatever you choose. But that's not, is that a father-son relationship? Jesus says when you don't know what to pray that's very simple. But a father-son relationship is, hey dad, right? I gotta be honest, this is not going good. If I made my son praise me first before we ever talked, relationship's over, right? He'd be like, no, Dad, we're good. I'm gonna be really honest with you. As much as I know that you were phenomenal, and I am very blessed at your greatness, Dad, the reality is our relationship is probably going to change. You know, if I tell him, you know, that the only time he can ever approach me is if he has positive things to say, our relationship is going to change. If I tell him that, well, you know, son, there's a way to talk to your father, there's a way not to, right? And here it is. It's going to change. And if I tell him, son, I don't want you to ever voice frustration with me, then that's not a relationship at all. And so we have this idea that we are sons and we have come into this deep relationship, and we don't stand at a distance because of sin anymore. That we stand close, that we stand right there. Because God says, you are my son, I am approachable, I want to talk to you. And we can run to God in the midst of our worry, we can run to God in the midst of our struggle. And I'll be honest, my dad is, I don't know that you would ever put him up for, Abba of the year, but I remember one time when I was a kid and I got into a little bit of a scuffle with some kids in the neighborhood, and like any big tough kid, I ran. And they chased me, and I was in a little better shape back then, so I was able to stay just a few steps ahead. But I'll never forget that moment when I kind of turned the corner. I lived on Shannon Bay Drive, and I remember when I turned the corner, and I remember seeing the white T-shirt of my dad standing in the yard. My dad always wore a white T-shirt, always. Right? It's just this thing. And I remember turning the corner and seeing the white T-shirt, and I remember thinking everything's gonna be all right now. All right? Because to me it was like, there's Dad. Now, my dad always has a weird way of dealing with things, but I remember still to this day the emotion of, there's my dad. And I mean, he can make me fight the guys on the lawn, but at least my dad's there to, oversee it and get me to the hospital in this. But I remember that emotion, and I think sometimes, we instead of approaching God with, oh, thank God you're here, God. I think we approach God with this, hey, can I come in? Right? And instead of having that approach of I'm running to, we have that approach of I'm looking for reasons to back away from. And I'm looking for reasons to back off. I'm looking for reasons to step away. And then it continues to say, the Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, now he's taking it to the next level. If we're children, then we're heirs. And then he takes it to the ultimate level. So now we go from sinners to saved, to not condemned, to debtors, to sons, to children, to heirs, to the ultimate in description of heir, heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, that we may also be glorified together. So now we go from sons to heirs. There are a lot of sons who are not heirs, right? That's Warren Buffett's kids. There are a lot of sons who are not heirs. There are a lot of sons who don't get any of the pot of wealth at the end. But all of us are heirs. And then really what I think is one of the craziest sentences in the world. We're joint heirs with Christ. I mean, let that one sink in just for a second, right? That we are joint heirs with Christ. Just let it marinate a little bit in your brain. It does not say that you are on the flow chart of heirs. It doesn't say, well, there's God, there's Jesus, and then there's your grandma, and then there's you. Right? It doesn't say that somewhere in there that you're on this flow chart. You're closer to the bottom than the top, but you're in there. Congratulations, you're going to get 2%. I remember I had an Aunt Dee Dee and Uncle Randy lived in Charleroi, Pennsylvania. They passed in 1986, I believe, and they were obviously pretty well off. I had never met them, but they left money to all of us, and they left me like $16,000 when I was like 16 years old. And right, I know, I bought some golf clubs and a Sega. But it was weird because they left everybody like this percentage. But my mom, who actually knew them, she got a tinge more than I did, which is just unfair because I cared deeply about Aunt Dee Dee and Uncle Randy. I never met them. My brother, who did meet them, he also got the same amount that I did. Right? But he had actually met them on a trip that they had made back east. I never met him, but I got this inheritance from him. Never had any relationship, nothing. ended up paying for my freshman year in college. But anyway, the idea was that there was this inheritance, even though there was zero relationship. But I got a percentage based on that relationship. They appreciated me, apparently, and they wanted to make sure everybody got some. But my mom got more. My uncle got more. Their kids got more than my mom and my uncle. Because it was based on this percentage of, hey, who you are to me. Okay? I was only $16,000 worth of important. Okay? Which, considering I didn't know him, I'll take it. Right? I was not complaining. Even though I missed them dearly. Anyway, the idea was I got a percentage based on my relationship. And I think sometimes when it comes to this idea of heirs, think about it in terms of being a co-heir. Co-heir does not mean that I'm getting 5% and you're getting 95%. Co-heir means that we're in this thing together. Now, that is a radical statement for any of us to be in any position to where we are co-anything with Christ. Right? Most of us would never put ourselves in that position. Most of us would not be so brash as to say, well, I co-suffer with Jesus. Right? Because if somebody said that to you, right, like you'd be all, I don't think we're going to hang out much. Because you're kind of self-righteous. And I don't have that level of self-righteousness yet. I'm hoping to achieve it someday. But this idea, right? If someone says that, I suffer as Jesus suffers. Okay, buddy. Right? But we have this idea that we would never do that. But Paul's saying, listen, we are co-heirs. It doesn't say that we're heirs of Christ. It says that we are co-heirs, ultimately, with Christ. We are co-heirs with what he's done. So, we also stand to inherit the promises of God. That is what we are heirs to. We are heirs to forgiveness. We are heirs to salvation. We are heirs to this relationship. We are heirs together, all of us, and there's no percentage. So you might be feeling guilty and feeling like, man, I can't do this and I don't deserve this. But the reality is, in Christ, we are all the same. Which means I stand to inherit what Justin stands to inherit. That's it. There's no amount of, I know that we always talk about the crowns and the jewels in our crown and the size of our house in heaven. But ultimately, we're all inheriting the same. We're inheriting the promises of God that are basically put before us. And if we suffer with him, then ultimately we will be glorified with him, is what he says. So if we suffer with, we will then ultimately be glorified alongside of. That's the relationship that we have. Does that sound like it's a relationship where God's saying, I want you to feel more guilt? We're going to talk about the prodigal son next week because it ties in nicely with this part of Paul's letter. Does that sound like he's asking for guilt? Does that sound like he wants you to feel awful? No. Because a father who loves his sons and daughters is never going to sit there and say, I want to make sure you feel guilty enough to be able to be welcome in my home. No. A father wants his sons and daughters in his home. A father wants his sons and daughters to be empowered. He doesn't want them dragging around the weight. A father wants to care for, love, and lift and enlighten his sons and daughters. And ultimately wants them to stand to inherit the promises that he has put. And, so as we continue to kind of talk about guilt and how we approach God and how we approach each other, we all stand to co-inherit with Christ. But we all also should be empowering each other and moving beyond guilt and moving beyond struggle. And one of the things that's so important in the church is when you see somebody struggling with guilt, is to help lift that. That's why he says, bear one another's burdens. Lift their weight. Lift the things that are going on inside them. And make sure that it's like, listen, I don't want you to, you got to move beyond guilt. You have to. Because all guilt does is slow you down. All guilt does is weigh you down. And all guilt does is it basically, create a person who's almost unusable at times. Who can't go forward and make a difference and can't change lives and can't impact people. We need to move forward. We need to basically step back and say, I got to drop this luggage, I got to drop this stuff, because I'm forgiven, and if God's forgiven me, who am I to unforgive me? Doesn't mean that we don't struggle with consequence when we make choices, but at the same time, there's also a shelf life on carrying it around with you. At some point, you have to drop it, because if you don't, it will bother every relationship you have for the rest of your life. It will bother everything that you try to do for Christ. It will bother everything you try to do for your family. It will drive everything in your life out of whack if you don't learn to drop it. So we're going to keep talking. Next week, prodigal son, which most of us are at one point one of those two sons. We're going to talk just briefly as kind of a quick dirt road off of this for a few minutes out of this letter, because it fits perfectly. So I'm going to invite the gentleman forward with the offering. We are going to close in prayer. So Father, right now we thank you so much for your servant Paul's words, God. May we take to heart that we are adopted. May we take to heart that we are your sons and daughters, that we stand before you elevated and empowered because we're called to drop the weight of guilt, we're called to drop the weight of pain, and step back and say, I've got to let this stuff go because it's affecting everything in my life. And it's time to move forward. And God, you don't want your sons and daughters to feel guilty. You want your sons and daughters to feel welcome and to feel empowered. God, we pray your blessing over the offering this morning. God, we pray your blessing over the provision for your church. And God, we thank you for only a month left of summer. So we'll cool off soon. In your name, amen.